Well, welcome back to Lessons of Vietnam. My name is Bill Dixon. My co-host, Bob Matthews, is not with us tonight. We've got inclement weather coming in out there, supposedly. The governor's already said we're on a state of emergency, but when I came in, it was 41 degrees on my car. But we're supposed to get a big snowstorm. Any snow is for us is big. Tonight is a second part of our show that we started last time. The symposium we did at North Carolina History Museum, they called the Early Battles, where we had three great men on a panel. Joe Marm, who was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions at the Ai Drang Valley. His part was basically left out of the movie. But Joe Galloway, who wrote the book with Hal Moore, and was the only civilian I know of who got a Bronze Star with a V device for valor, was our guest also. And then a gentleman by the name of Cliff Haskins. Sorry about that, Cliff. I just had a senior moment. Cliff Haskins, who was also involved in the Battle of the Ai Drang Valley, that they also left out of the movie. So this symposium was those three men coming together, telling a little bit about the Battle of Ai Drang Valley and the 7th Cavalry, which of course everybody knows as Custer's group at Little Bighorn. And at one time, everybody was thinking of Custer and Little Bighorn there at Ai Drang Valley. We stopped last time with Joe Galloway talking, and we're going to take back over with Joe talking, and then we're going on into Cliff Haskins. The first part is my asking Joe another question, and I hope you enjoy it. Give us a call at 919-518-9773 and give us a comment or a suggestion or ask a question. I'm not certain I can answer the question about Joe or any of the other two guys, but they were real heroes. It's not every day you get a chance to hear real heroes talk what they went through. Excuse me, had that frog in my throat. Joe Marm was shot through the jaw trying to rescue that lost platoon. Even though Joe Galloway and Joe Marm were in the same battle right there together, well, they really weren't together because the helicopter that brought in Joe Galloway to the battle was the helicopter that took Joe Marm out, wounded in the jaw. So they kind of passed in the night as they've been. We're going to start off now with Joe Galloway finishing up his part of the symposium. And go ahead, Joe. Joe, didn't they tell you that war correspondents were supposed to stay in Saigon for the 5 o'clock follies? You weren't supposed to get out in the field and get shot?
No, nobody told me that. I spent 2 days in Saigon when I first arrived in April of 1965. I spent 2 days in Saigon. I got my press card from the South Vietnamese and my press card from the Americans. And with that, I had a ticket to ride anywhere in the country. And my boss at United Press said, "You're going to cover the Marines, who just landed their 1st Battalion 2 weeks before." And so I went straight to the Marines in Da Nang and spent better part of 7 months covering every Marine operation in I Corps. The movie would have you believe I was kind of a greenhorn when I came into landing zone X-ray, but far from it. I'd been shot at and missed and crapped at and hit more than a few times with the Marines. So I stumbled onto the Cav because the Marines didn't have many helicopters, and what they had were the old CH-34 shuttering shithouse. And they didn't have many of those, so they walked everywhere. And I wore out 2 pair of boondockers and a lot of uniforms in my 7 months with the Marines, and I had a fierce case of crotch rot and pit rot and everything else. And I wanted out of those rice paddies, and I heard about this new outfit called the 1st Cavalry Division, which had 435 helicopters in their inventory. And I thought, you know, if I hang out with those guys, I get to walk to work. I get to ride to work. I've walked to work till now. I'm on a ride from now on. Of course, they didn't tell me when you got off the helicopter, usually you were up to your neck in it. And so that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Now, where did you go after Idrang and you left with Hal Moore's group and so forth? Where did you go from there?
Well, I went down to Saigon for a few days, but Hal Moore decided that he wasn't going to have any combat operations that I wasn't on. And so I would get a call wherever I was to get myself to Ankh, and if I couldn't get there, he'd send a helicopter to get me. And I made most of his combat operations. I did the Bong San operation in January and February, which was pretty sporty stuff. And several other, I did some stuff with the 1st Infantry Division. I did some time with the 173rd Airborne, the 101st Airborne, and back to the Marines again. I was all over the place for that first 18 months. And I left in the late fall of '66.
You saw a lot of combat in those 18 months.
I saw a terrific amount of combat in those 18 months, and I would have stayed longer. I swear to God, I would have, but for one thing, all these guys that I learned with got up and left at the end of their 1 year or 13 month in the case of the Marines. So all the guys that I had learned this stuff with left, and a whole new crop of greenhorns came in. And you know, the thing about combat is the learning curve is a bitch. The first 3 months, you'll take 70% of your casualties out of a year's tour. Those first 3 months of learning are just so deadly. And I found myself on operations, I would travel with Vietnamese cameraman. And some of them were old veterans of their own who had either been with the Viet Cong or they had been with the French fighting the Viet Cong for years and years. And, one of them, he'd nudge me and say, "Oh, Mr. Joe, we need to be very careful. Up ahead, there's a very good ambush spot." And I would find myself trying to explain to an Army colonel why he was doing things wrong. And they don't like to hear that. And I don't like to die unnecessarily. So eventually, it would come to, well, the next helicopter that comes by, me and this guy won't leave. And they'd say, "Well, what, are you chicken?" I'd say, "No, not chicken. I just think that you're doing things really stupid. If you're going through rubber country where the enemy can snap an ambush from a quarter mile either side of the road, and you got all of your people on the road traveling at the speed of a walking man with a line of trucks full of supplies, and you're letting Vietnamese pass through on motorbikes, something bad is going to happen to you. And somebody's going to get killed, and it's never the colonel. It's his men." So I decided it was time to leave. And I swore I'd never come back to that place again. I came back 3 more times. 1971 for the invasion of Laos, Lamson 719. I came back in 73 for the phony peace and the release of our prisoners, and then I was there in '75 when it all went down the tubes. And that was just heartbreaking to sit there day after day. And all of those places that we had fought over, given so much blood, so much of our treasure, our treasured men and women too, were just going by the wayside, one after the other. I'd see some province had fallen to the North Vietnamese. Oh, that's where My Lai is. That's where this is, that is, you know, and it was just heartbreaking. Plus we were gone, really, and the Vietnamese were left to sort it out on their own. I thought that it left a bad taste in my mouth.
So to end up, finish up on a little lighter note there, you in the movie, you talked about your grandfather being a one-legged man and your grandmother was, tell us that story, how it went from.
I got to tell you, you can't make this stuff up. I got it from my grandmother's. My father's maternal side, his grandfather was Sergeant James Isham Galloway of the 4th Texas Infantry, Hood's Brigade. And he lost his left leg charging the guns of the New York Zouaves at the Second Manassas Battle. And they, you know, put him in a hospital and sawed off the parts that needed sawing, and then eventually told him to go on home. And I don't, to this day, know how he made it home, a one-legged man on a crutch. A long way to Robertson County, Texas, but that's where he went. Well, over in the 2nd Louisiana Infantry is Private James Reed. And he was captured by the Yankees at Cold Harbor. He was a very young man. And they decided, he was so young, they said, we're going to parole you to go home. You're out of this war. Just go on home. Well, like a fool, he went straight back to his outfit, just as straight as he could go. And he arrived there on the eve of the Battle of the Wilderness. And they rewarded him by making him the color bearer. And he lasted all of 2 minutes once the battle began, and he had his right leg shot off, and his right arm, the bone was shattered by a mini ball, and his arm was never more any good. Now, he spent a lot of time in a hospital and then was put on a hospital ship, a coastwise steamer that sailed as close inland as possible to stay out of the way of the Yankee Navy. And this boat was full of wounded, and it sailed around the Florida Keys and on its way to New Orleans. And by the time they got around the Keys, Grandpa said there were a flock of 1,000 sharks following this boat, and the surgeons were sawing and throwing it off the fantail. And the guys laying down below joked that the sharks had had the hors d'oeuvres and they were waiting for the main course. And but he made it to New Orleans, and after the war, he went to Texas and bought the farm next door to Sergeant Galloway. And those two old coots would go to town once a year and buy one pair of boots and split them up and walk out the door giggling over how they had screwed the shopkeeper. And they enjoyed each other's company so much that Mr. Reed married his daughter Elizabeth off to Sergeant Galloway's son Glidwell, and that was my paternal grandmother and grandfather. And you can't make stuff like that up. Before I give up the mic, I want to tell a little story about the Iadrang battles and a North Carolina boy. And I once said that I was going to write a book just about this, but he didn't make it. And this is a young infantryman in the 2nd of the 7th Cavalry named Toby Braveboy out of Coward, North Carolina. And boy, if ever there was a wrongly named town for that boy to come from. He was in the ambush at landing zone Albany. He was a Lumbee Indian. And he was in that ambush, and his platoon was overrun, and everybody was killed. And he was badly wounded. And after dark, he crawled off the battlefield the best he could. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he had to get out of there because the enemy were walking around executing the wounded. And he crawled down into a little creek, and he found a hole in the bank, and he backed into that, and he passed out. He woke up the next day, and the battle was over. He couldn't hear any shooting or any cannons or anything like that. But he looked up, and a column of North Vietnamese soldiers was going down this creek bed, right smack in front of him. And he just froze, and they all went by without seeing him except the last man in the column, a very young soldier, turned, looked at Braveboy, raised his AK-47, and Braveboy had had his hand shattered by a bullet, and it was by now infected and bloody, and he just raised that hand up and said, "No." The North Vietnamese kid looked at him, shook his head, and kept walking. And Braveboy crawled out. It was 2 or 3 days after the battle was over. He crawled out into a clearing. He heard a helicopter, and a H-13 scout helicopter came over, and they thought he was an enemy. And the observer was going to shoot him with an M16. And the pilot said, no, wait a minute, that's an American. And they didn't have any room to pick him up, but they dropped him some food, and they called in a Huey. And he came out of there and went through the hospital and all that and made it home to North Carolina. And I was hoping to find him, and what I found was that he came home, he went to work as a roofer. I think he drank a bit, and he killed himself in a car crash. But I think of him alone on that battlefield. And I think of that North Vietnamese kid who couldn't kill him. War is a funny thing.
Yes, it is. Joe, thank you very much, especially for that. That's another story you can't make up. It's so phenomenal. And thank you for being here, and appreciate what you have done for us Vietnam veterans, and you've probably done more to legitimize us for long than anybody else. We appreciate you being here. Next, we want to have Chris Haskins. Yes, thank you. We could have a couple more hours of these guys' stories, just it would be okay, but I think the museum is
would have a little problem with us. Cherie's out there someplace. Again, I want to thank the North Carolina History Museum for allowing us to be here, and with the sound system. Joel is back there someplace in the window, I think. I can't see back that far for the light, but doing a great job. Again, I want to thank the museum for working with us. We got a couple other things coming up. You know, Paul Harvey used to say, let's talk about the rest of the story. And one of the reasons we have Cliff Haskins here tonight is because he knows and lived through the rest of the story. You know, if you saw the movie, it looked like when Hal Moore got on that helicopter and left, all Americans had left. But it wasn't quite that way, was it, Cliff?
No, it was somewhat different.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about now, how long you had been, you were there the day before, were you arrived the day that they left, or you were there actually there one day, another day before that? So.
Of course, the battle began on the 14th, and my battalion arrived about noon on the 15th. And my platoon arrived by air probably around 9 and 10 that morning, okay, before my battalion arrived.
Yeah. Now, you were with the second, let's see, how more, y'all were with the first?
First of the 7th.
First of the 7th, and you would have been the second of the 7th.
Second and
Second to the
fifth.
fifth.
Second of the 5th, okay. All right. So we want to get that straight.
Battalion,
All right.
you walked in, didn't you? The
He
battalion?
flew in.
My platoon,
Battalion walked in.
my platoon flew in, the battalion walked in. The platoon flew in because I was in the mortar platoon, and we were at Victor, and Colonel Tully and the S3 had arranged for us to be flown in. And as soon as Colonel Tully departed LZ Victor, which was probably 3.5 to 4 kilometers from X-ray, and it was southeast, he departed, and about 45 minutes later, he left at 0800 hours. He would have left sooner, but Bravo Company, 2nd to the 5th, was left at LZ Falcon to secure the artillery there overnight, and they had to be airlifted in. There was a lot of air movements that morning, so we had to wait for the Bravo Company to get to Victor, and then he left with the battalion. And my platoon left about 8:45. The Hueys came to pick us up, and we took off. As soon as we got up, we could see smoke and debris, stuff coming up from X-ray. It wasn't a very long flight. But before we got there, the chopper pilots were told to hold off for a few minutes, and they flew out to the west and north and held for a few minutes, and then they came down in the Idrang River bottom, and they flew map of the earth with the struts appearing to me to even hit the water at times. And then at some point they came up out of the river bottom and flew directly into X-ray. And my guess is it was after 9 o'clock then.
So it was like a roller coaster, but worse.
Right, but the battalion itself, they traveled overland to X-ray, and they arrived after 12 o'clock, probably 12:30 or so, when Colonel Tully, the lead elements, got to X-ray.
Okay. So you were there.
And that was on the, that would have been then on the 15th.
15th, the last day.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. How was it? How the second?
Second day.
Second day. Okay. How was the? How did you feel when the first pulled out and left y'all there? I mean, it's kind of got lonesome after all that was going on, I would imagine.
Well, as the 1st to the 7th was extracted, the 2nd to the 7th was brought in.
You got 2 battalions in that
So there
little
was
hole.
two battalions there. Also extracted was Bravo Company, 2nd to the 7th, and a platoon there from Alpha Company, 2nd to the 7th. that had been brought in, they were extracted all that day. So we had, and oh, by the way, the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cav had Alpha Company, 1st to the 5th, attached to it, which made it pretty much a full battalion, minus that one platoon that was in Alpha Company.
Yeah.
And I think the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cav commander attached the battalion recon platoon to Alpha Company, which give it 3 platoons, 3 maneuver platoons.
Yeah. Doing research on the battle and so forth, it seems like I had read that Westmoreland didn't want y'all to leave with Hal Moore's group because he didn't look like y'all were retreating, which is the reason he decided to march out instead. That's.
I don't know if that's true or not. My battalion received a frag order on the night of the 15th that we would move off of X-ray on the 17th. And the reason we were moving is because B-52 bombers were going to bomb that area. B-52 bombers had already been used the 2 previous days in support of that ground action. Mm-hmm. And so we knew as early as the night of the 15th that on the 17th we were going to move.
You were going to move to Albany.
The 2nd Battalion, 7th
Moving
Cav.
to LZ Columbus. Or
Right.
Columbus, okay.
My battalion was ordered to move to LZ Columbus, which was east and slightly north of X-ray. And the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cav was ordered to move to an area they called Albany. And that was northeast, more north than east of X-ray. Mm-hmm. The 2nd Battalion, 7th Cav followed us in the as we departed that morning.
And then split.
Yeah, and split after we had traveled probably 2,000 meters or so. Actually, the lead elements of my battalion were reaching LZ Columbus, and Colonel Tully did something that some commanders didn't do, but he always, when the battalion moved like that, he adjusted in artillery fire to our flanks or to our front, and we moved off of X-ray with artillery fire to our front. And he kept that artillery adjusted in front of the battalion until we got so close to LZ Columbus that it was danger for those elements there.
But he offered to give it
That's right.
to the 2nd of the 7th Commander, and the guy turned it down.
At that time, when he ceased that concentration, he offered that firing data to the battalion, either the S3 or the battalion commander, and I heard that over the command net. And the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cav was just turning north, or had already turned but hadn't traveled far. But they declined that information. And I'm not sitting here to say that it would have changed anything. But like I say, what it did do for my battalion, it gave you had a artillery concentration adjusted in, and if you made contact with the enemy, or if you were adjusted, within a matter of seconds you could have effective artillery fire on the enemy, which would assist you greatly. Artillery saved the day at X-ray and saved my neck many times after that.
So, were y'all part of the group that got ambushed on the way to your LZ, or?
My battalion closed on X-ray, and we were ordered, not on X-ray, on Columbus.
Columbus.
We secured the artillery. 2 batteries of artillery were located at Columbus. We secured them, and the battalion commander had 2 companies send out platoon-sized patrol in that area. Night came pretty quick, and the 2nd and the 7th, we were aware that they had been ambushed, and we could hear over the radio that night that they were in big trouble. And as a matter of fact, the following morning,
Buse-Tully came in
yeah,
to Albany.
yeah, but we had 4 soldiers from the 2nd to the 7th. They could hear the artillery firing at LZ Columbus, and they followed that sound, and they came into LZ Columbus the next morning before my battalion was ordered to move to another LZ.
So you didn't fly out from that LZ, you went to another LZ from,
We were ordered at that time to air assault into LZ Crooks, which, and the purpose for that, we had to go and secure that LZ for 2 batteries of artillery that would move there that day. And that artillery was going to fire in support, of course, of my battalion, but also there was an ARVN, a Vietnamese brigade. I guess they wanted to get in on the action, and they were going to operate near the Cambodian border and try to find and fix and engage the remaining forces that had engaged at X-ray. So
A young major named Norm Schwarzkopf was with one
them.
of the battalions.
Yes, and I really am not aware of their success or,
They did pretty good according to Norm.
yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
now the movie did not. A lot of the 2nd or the 7th guys were upset that the LZ Albany was not part of the movie, but it's in the book, and Joe and Colonel Moore did a great job in describing what happened at LZ Albany. But a lot of the veterans were upset, but they could only put so much in the movie, and they suffered. Some people call it a meeting engagement. Others call it an ambush at Albany. It depends on your level. If you're down at the ground level, the grunt level, it's an ambush. At the general level, it's a meeting engagement. But they lost 155 Americans killed in action out of the 2nd and the 7th, 122 wounded in action out of
In
about
6 hours' time.
out of about 450 total troopers. So they suffered a lot of casualties. And as they were saying, the NVA were going around shooting the wounded. So it was pretty tough fight.
It was a tough fight, and as I had friends with that battalion, they explained it. They had a serious problem to begin with, because as the lead elements of the battalion reached Albany, the battalion commander called the company commanders forward for a briefing, I suppose, to show them the area along the LZ that he wanted them to occupy. And this ambush occurred
When they were all
while
away
they
from
were
their companies.
They were either on the way there, or they were there, and they were not with their companies, and that caused a lot of
A lot
problems.
of casualties.
well,
I know-
they also were probably taking their radio operators with them.
They took their
Their
sergeants
radio
and their
operator,
radio operators with them.
There was a company commander of Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Cav, who was,
George Forrest.
he was with strangers because he was attached to the 2nd and the 7th. He had not quite reached where the commander was when the attack happened, and he immediately reversed and returned to his company. He was a football player, and he was quite fast, and he run
600 meters
Jeez.
just like
through
that.
the middle of the ambush.
And in that process, he lost his RTO, and I think two of them, the other person with him too. But he did get back to his company and get it organized and saved, I'm sure, some of those men.
Oh, he saved a lot of them.
Yeah.
Now, how long had you been in Vietnam when this event occurred?
My battalion, or the whole division, arrived in Vietnam in September of '65. We departed, just like the colonel has already said, my battalion departed from Charleston, South Carolina in August, and we arrived in Vietnam in about the middle of September. And my battalion had done operations both east and west on Highway 19, trying to make it secure for truck movement, delivering supplies and stuff. And we had been on some search and destroy operations prior to the Play Me Special Forces camp becoming attacked.
Yeah. Pele was kind of the starting point for what brought y'all to our Drang was the trying to overrun. That was when the Colonel Beckwith, yes, was riding an armored personnel carrier with his sword out in front, going charge, going in. So, Cliff, how long were you in the military?
I went in the Army in 1959 and got out in 1981.
How many times you go to Vietnam?
22 years. I served 3 tours in Vietnam.
What year? When did you go back to the second one?
I went back with the 199th Light Infantry Brigade. I was in the 5th Battalion, 12th Infantry, and that was in 1969 and 70.
Okay.
A matter of fact, my battalion, the 5th Battalion, 12th Infantry, was attached to the 1st Cav for the movement into Cambodia. And after we returned from Cambodia in June, the battalion, the 199th, stood down, and I was reassigned, since I had a few months left, to the 1st Cav again, with the 1st of the 5th. Again. Well,
right.
the 1st of the 5th this time. I was with the 2nd of the 5th the first time,
Yeah.
but still the 5th Cav.
Yeah. It's hard to keep up with the units like that.
Yeah, that's right. And then I returned to Vietnam with the 501st Infantry with the 101st Airborne at Phu Bai, and stayed with them a year and extended because it was winding down. A matter of fact, the division departed Cam Ranh Bay in March of 1972. We practiced our parade on the airfield. If anybody was in Vietnam and have ever been to Cam Ranh Bay and how busy that airfield was, well, in March of '72, the 101st was doing drill and ceremony on the airfield. And the division returned to Fort Campbell, and Spiro Agnew was the reviewing dignitary. And shortly after that, I believe he had some difficulties and give it up.
Yes. Thank you for being with us again tonight and doing your story. And especially want to thank all 3 of you gentlemen. Let's take a couple minutes break and then come back for question and answers. That'll give everybody, give these guys a chance to get their voice back, and then we'll go questions and answers. My microphone guys, if y'all grab those microphones, get your questions.
Well, that was the story of the Our Drang Valley. I hope you enjoyed that information. It's amazing the details and so forth that Joe Galloway has kept on his mind. and Cliff's part and talking about the difference in the commanders. His commander used the artillery to protect his troops. The other guy decided not to use artillery. Cliff's officer, a colonel, kept the group together, where the other officer called all of his squad leaders, platoon leaders, radio operators, and sergeants all up to the front, which left his men without leadership, and which is where they got ambushed so bad. And during the process of trying to save what they could, with artillery coming in, they probably lost almost as many men from friendly fire as they did from enemy fire. And the ones that the enemy wounded, they came back along and shot, so there would be no prisoners. So we're going to start in just a few minutes with the question and answer period. Some good questions in there. There's some weird questions in there too. A couple things I wanted to bring up to you. This coming Friday, with Lord being willing to keep the weather behaving itself, we will be doing our second symposium with the North Carolina History Museum. This one will be American POWs and Vietnamese re-education camps. We will have two friends of ours who've been on the show, Bill Schuette, who was the navigator for Jeremiah Denton, who became the congressman from Arkansas, I believe it was, and then Brigadier General Norman Gaddis, who was on his 69th mission. When he ejected, his navigator ejected first, and nobody's heard or seen from him since then. He's one of our guest panelists. And then we have Colonel Hein Vo, who was, at the time that Saigon fell, was a major. Went from a machine gun to 8 years in re-education camp, and telling his story. So we're looking forward to that, and those of you who are too far away to come, we hope to eventually have that also on the show. That one is going to be an exciting show whatsoever, covering the POWs. Bill Schuette was at one time at Song Tay. Song Tay was the one that the American soldiers went in to rescue the prisoners that had just been moved because their well was dry and contaminated. So they moved the prisoners from Song Tay. And after the Song Tay raid, the prisoners were treated better and brought into Saigon and got better treatment, because the communists realized that the American soldiers could get into any place they wanted to in North Vietnam, which they didn't think before. So a couple other things coming up. March 7th, we have our normal POW MIA ceremony. One of our POWs, we had 41. Sometime in March, Bunyan D. Price from Belmont, North Carolina, his remains will be coming home, and we'll have a funeral service for him in Belmont, North Carolina. So then there'll be 41 still unaccounted for. We're excited for Bunyan Price's family to get that closure. March 22nd, the American Legion Post 116 is doing a Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans Day. Free food, displays. We'll have the 1/8 wall there. That is the 116 American 116 post is Fuquay, North Carolina, and their post is a beautiful place right on the lake, off Johnson Pond Road, not too far from Cary. It's probably closer to Cary than it is to Fuquay. So that's going to be an exciting day. By the way, just to bring it up so you remember, March 8th, you will need to spring forward, because that is daylight savings times coming in on March 8th. It's hard to believe that we're getting that close, especially when we got all these snowstorms we've been having. Somebody forgot to tell her we live in the South. We're not supposed to have all these snowstorms and so forth. I mean, here, everybody talks about, I saw a flake today. I mean, the 3 flakes fell out of the sky, and somebody saw them, and everybody went to the store and got milk and bread. And when you have real snow, everything goes crazy. So we got those things coming on. And then our special thing is Etchings and Stone. I know if you're anywhere close by, you want to come and take part in that. That is a play written by Ron Harris, from a North Carolina native, actually grew up in Wake Forest, wrote a play. And the concept of the play, it's a memorial. It's a story about the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in D.C., as some people call it, the wall that heals. And the concept is you as the audience are sitting inside the wall looking out, and you are able to hear the thoughts or what people are having to say. Wives of Vietnam veterans whose names are on the wall, the children of the soldier whose name's on the wall, the wife, or just visitors. And it's a very moving show. We're doing quite a bit. We're helping, got a great deal of help with the History Museum and also William Peace University. Drama and Apartment is directing it. And we're looking forward to that. That is March 27th, which is a Friday. That show starts at 7 o'clock. March 28th, that show starts at 4 o'clock. And on the 29th, which is a Sunday, which is also National Vietnam Veterans Appreciation Day, it starts at 2 o'clock. Now, there will be displays there. We'll have helicopters on display. We'll have vehicles on display. We'll have the 1/8 replica of the wall there that you can get information about the names on the wall printed out for you. We'll have uniforms and other paraphernalia and memorabilia from Vietnam. So there's a lot of things going on at North Carolina History Museum those 3 days. The tickets are free. If you will call 919-276-7654 and tell the machine what performance you want to see, either the Friday, Saturday, or Sunday performance, how many tickets you need, and your telephone number and your name. And we will reserve seats for you. Now, all we're asking for, if you get tickets, to make sure somebody uses that ticket. We want a butt in every chair, because we don't want someone to miss being able to see this play that is so moving and so heartfelt that we want to make sure that anybody that can, so if you're going to get a ticket doesn't show up, it may cause somebody else who wants to see it to not be able to see it. Now we're ready to start the second part of the taped symposium. I want to tell you that Joe Galloway mentioned a while ago a soldier by the name of Brave Boy. Brave Boy is actually a Lumbee Indian from down in Lumberton area down in North Carolina. And that was quite a story that how the North Vietnamese soldier looked at him and he looked at them, and they just kind of went on and let him be because he looked like he was there was no harm he could do because of the condition. But now we're going to start the second part with the questions and answers. Hopefully that you can hear the people in the audience who ask the questions. We have veterans out there with microphones and so forth. So looking forward to that part. And if you have any questions whatsoever or comments, 919-518-9773. Our North Carolina Vietnam veteran members,
We'll get a microphone to you so you can ask a question, ask it to the group, individual, whichever you want to do. Before we get started on that, I wanted to introduce one of our members. We call him the Idea Man. He comes up with lots of ideas, very talented young man from Wake Forest, North Carolina. And I have given you up here a thing he wrote about football and Vietnam. It's very good. He also has written a play called Etchings and Stone, and I wanted to let him come up and tell you a little bit about it. We're doing here in this auditorium, March 27th, 28th, and 29th. Mr. Ron Harris.
Thank you. As Bill said, write it down on your program or something. March 27th, 28th, and 29th. We're going to try to have 3 performances of this play right here on the stage. It's got a unique concept in that you as the audience will be sitting there looking through the wall at visitors who come to the wall. And you'll be able to not only hear what they have to say, but you'll also be able to hear what they're thinking. We did that so we don't use professional actors, we use Vietnam vets, and they don't want to memorize lines, so we can pre-record it, and so they don't have to memorize the lines. But when you put it into effect, it looks like you're seeing what they're thinking. We cover issues like POWs, MIAs, Agent Orange, post-traumatic stress disorder, all the issues that Vietnam vets have to go through or have gone through. But that's only half of it. The other half is about the wives, the mothers, the sisters, the children that's left behind that never went to Vietnam but are as deeply affected by the war as the men who fought in the war. Because it's not just about us, it's about the family and what the war did to the family. It's free of charge, but we'll have tickets for that event. Because we want to make sure everybody has a seat. So if you ask for tickets, fine, we'll be glad to give you tickets. But if you can't come, make sure we want all these seats full in here. And we did this at Nick Rowe High School in McAllen, Texas. Their high school drama team put it on. And they were excellent. 98% of that high school Hispanic. And so, in looking at it, young kids trying their best. I mean, they did a great job. But we thought we could do it better if we had real vets and wives of vets and children of vets playing their parts that are actually who they are. So it's a little unique in that way. But we would love to have all of y'all show up. The play is just the centerpiece. It's an event. Hopefully we'll have helicopters out here on the street beside here. We'll have the vehicle restoration. People have all kind of military vehicles there. You've seen part of Mike Cook's memorabilia display out here. That's only a tiny piece of what Mike's got. We've got other displays. We're going to have a miniature wall that's got just like it's 1/8 scale replica of the wall in Washington, D.C. You'll be able to get rubbings from the wall, be able to get information on people you're looking for on the wall. We'll have a computer that does all that. So it's going to be a huge event, and that's March 27th, 28th, and 29th. And we'll have more information as we come along. We have a website called etchingsandstone.org, O-R-G. It's all lowercase, no spaces. Go to that, and that has more information, and also has a preview of what they did down in Texas. Thank you.
We had about 2,000 people go through the play in McAllen, Texas. Nick Rowe was one of our members. Nick Rowe was 5 years a POW in the tiger cages of Vietnam and escaped, one of the few that was escaped. Whenever we go to D.C. as a group, we usually tell the old guard we're coming, and we'd like to do a service for Nick. And they always supply us with a color guard and bugler. So when we're there doing a remembrance for Nick, we always draw a crowd. And 2 years ago in November, we were there, and a guy walked up to us and said, "Did you know Nick Rowe?" And we said, "Yes, that's why we're here." And he said, "Well, I'm from his hometown." And to make a long story short, and about a month and a half, 2 months later, we were in McAllen, Texas, telling the students there who Nick Rowe was, because most of them didn't know. After we left, they put in about $1,200 into a display case of Nick Rowe. They bought flags to go all the way around the perimeter of the school, and then asked us to go back, which were when we did the play and so forth. Now, if you've got questions, we'd like to give you an opportunity to ask questions. This young lady right here has a question I already know because she's already asked me, and I told her she had to do it herself.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today. This is just an honor and a privilege for all of us to be in the presence of such great people. I'd like to know from each of you what your favorite story about Lieutenant General Moore is. And the last I heard, he was not doing very well, and I'd just like to know how his health is.
Well, physically, he's unchanged the last couple of years. He has dementia, and it's biting him. He lives at home. They have a caretaker. He'll be 92 years old next month. And he sleeps all day and wanders around the house all night.
His son lives next to him too? Retired?
Lives down the road.
Down the road.
5 minutes away. His son, Colonel Dave Moore, took an early retirement from the Army to take care of his dad. And the other kids, he's got 5 kids, and they take turns coming in and spending a week with Dad.
Julie is buried at the Fort Benning Cemetery, and that's a unique story too. The cemetery was full. There was no places to be buried, so our company RTO was killed in the Idrang, and had his wife remarried and had a plot, so she gave the plot to the Moores. So General Moore will be buried there too. And the last I saw him was at Sergeant Major Plumley's funeral. And Joe did the eulogy, did an outstanding job, and Sam Elliott, the actor, came for they were very close, and so he came for the funeral too. And Sergeant Major Plumley's buried there, along with his wife, at Fort Benning Cemetery. So that was the last I saw General Moore. But he was a tough guy, and like Joe said, we had to shave every morning.
Keep Colonel Moore, General Moore, General Moore in your thoughts. As your next person wants to have a question, up on the front here we have some cards that from Walter J. Marm about the Medal of Honor. That's very interesting. If you at the end of the night you want to pick up one, help yourself until they're gone. When they're gone, they're gone. But save some for the next person. But graciously put some out there. And we have another question back over right there. There's a man with a mic. Hold it up close so we can hear you, please.
Yeah, Joe Galloway. There was a scene from the movie, and I'm trying to separate fact from fiction. Could you tell us about your return to base?
Return?
When you returned to base after the battle. There was a scene that was not in the movie.
The bar.
The parade.
Oh, you're talking about the scene at the officers club?
No, the scene when Plumley pushed you out into the battalion that was marching back in. Yes, it was a deleted scene.
I'm not catching the question here.
I'm just trying to, it didn't appear in the book. When essentially in the scene, you, Moore, Plumley were standing as the battalion formed up marched back in. And Plumlee pushed you out to march in with the battalion.
He was saying that you were a part of the Union.
Yeah, that must not have made the movie.
No, it didn't make the movie,
cut it
but
out.
did it happen?
Didn't happen either.
Okay. No wonder. Thank you.
We went back to play coup,
Right?
and you know, my observation was before I left to go south. I was, you know, the Albany thing was happening, and I went out and saw some of that. And then there was a press conference with Brigadier General Knowles, Dick Knowles, the assistant division commander. And he got up and he said, well, there were light casualties at Albany, and it wasn't an ambush, it was a meeting engagement. And I had just come back from there, and they were pulling parts of people out of the trees and loading bodies onto Chinook helicopters and just stacking them. And when they would close the tailgate, the blood would gush out of the hinges. And I couldn't stand this. I stood up and I pointed my finger at this brigadier general, and I said, General, what you're saying is bullshit, and you know it. And the press conference blew up right there. I mean, the journalists were all smelling blood, and the general was running for cover. And I saw him at many a reunion after the war, and actually sat down and had lunch in his hometown of Roswell, New Mexico, a few years ago. And he never forgot that press conference and what I said, and he defended himself to the last day. He died last year.
Yeah. We have a question over here on this side, I believe. Steve, you had somebody with a... Well, we run out of time. We'll finish up the next show, and then we'll have another guest, or not quite certain what we're going to have for the next show other than to finish up the last 15 minutes or 20 minutes of the question and answers. If you have any questions for the next show, write them down and give us a call. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again. You have a good remainder of February, and look forward to March going out like a lamb, because we definitely need a break on the weather. I don't think this year, if the weatherman says something about a drought, I think everybody will shoot him. Again, thank you very much for being part of Lessons of Vietnam, and good night.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.